So now that we understand the context, the philosophical, metaphysical context for stasis concern with possibility of free will and the possibility that everything is caused um, in some way, it's time to focus on the key concepts that we will be applying to our own causal history. You will, as I said, be thinking like Stace, and meaning like a self-determinist, like a compatibilist, about some of the events, actions, choices, or decisions that you note as maybe at some point a cause, maybe at some point the effect or an outcome of a cause. To do this, you're going to have to practice intellectual empathy, which you learned about at the beginning of the semester. You've been practicing intellectual empathy anytime you read and try to understand what a philosopher thinks about or what it means to hold a certain position in theory. You are practicing intellectual empathy in this case when you followed the lectures and me and read through this text to try to understand why and how Stace thinks, says what he does, how he thinks about things and whatnot. So when you apply a theory, it's really important to apply intellectual empathy because you're trying to get inside the thinking shoes of someone who holds that theory. So you're trying to become Stace in a sense, to make sure that you are applying his view correctly, not taking anything out of context. I provided you with video-based instruction, about an hour of instruction with respect to the extended excerpt. And now we're going to focus on one last lesson, a tiny lesson that is going to make sure that you really do understand the two main concepts that you are applying for the writing for this component of this week's writing task. And to do that, I suggest you get a piece of paper out because you're going to want to make sure you have this. What we're going to do is we are going to write up the ideas that Stace associated with free acts and unfree acts. Now, whenever I say free acts or unfree acts, I want you to think also of events, decisions, and choices as worded in the prompt so far for this portion of this week's task. And so what I want to start with is free acts. And we're going to be using pages 6, 8, and 9 to come up with a comprehensive definition per Stace's thinking as he starts to develop it. This is going to really allow us to get a clear, precise, and accurate understanding of what he thinks is free acts. And of course, what he thinks it is based on what he says or how he says other people use the term, hence the correct definition. So I should say what Stace thinks is the correct definition. You don't have to agree with him. Remember, intellectual empathy does not mean that you have to believe or accept or think that what other people say is true. All it means is that you're able to see why they think, why someone thinks something is true or plausible or likely. And also, remember, intellectual empathy, it doesn't mean that you're entering an opposing view. You might say, wow, Stace really captured my thinking. He really captures the way that I think about free will and being unfree. You're still practicing intellectual empathy when you try to apply his theory as he would. So a warning, even if you agree with everything that Stace does in the excerpt that we looked at and his definitions, don't just think that you can just go based on your own opinion. It's so important to use the precise wording that we are going to come up with as excavated from the reading that we did. So these are the definitions that you're going to be using. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to be pulling from 3 pages because we're trying to get a really sufficient, thorough definition. So here I have a triangle. We're going to create a concept triangle, and we're going to use intellectual empathy to create a concept triangle as Stace might create for his definition, or what he takes to be the correct definition for free will. So here we have the term, and up here we're going to put the definition. So we're first going to draw from what he says here on page 8. So let's find that right there. So page 8. So page 8, we are going to say caused by desires or motives or by some sort, write small because we're going to write quite a bit here, of internal psychological state, and it could be one, more than one psychological state, some sort of internal psychological states of the agent's mind. Now, so important, desires, motives, okay? Internal psychological states, two-word concept, agent's mind. So it's very important to understand that when he's talking about agent, he is talking about the person that when we observe them or when the agent's thinking about themselves, we're talking about the conscious being that is making choices, decisions, and acting, okay? So not an external agent, not an agent external to the mind of the being whose actions are in question with respect to being free or not, but the very being who is engaged in some action or decision or choosing. All right, and of course you see psychological states. Now, he elaborates on that just a bit when he comes down here. He says, "For it is obvious that all those actions of men which we should ordinarily attribute to the exercise of their free will, or which we should say they freely chose to do them, are in fact actions that have been caused by their own." Now, he adds a little bit more detail when it comes to psychological states right here. So we want to say includes desires, wishes, thoughts, emotions, impulses. So for example, I used to be confused about why would Stace say that stealing bread because you're hungry is of your own free will? Well, he's going to say that because that's an internal impulse, internal to your being that made you do that. Okay, so we said we were here on impulses. What does he say? Or other psychological states. So what he's doing here in this sentence then is he's taking what he said earlier when he first gave us what he officially designated as the correct definition for free acts. Remember, on the previous page, he said that free acts are those caused by motives, desires, or by some sort of internal psychological states. Well, what he does on page 9 at the end is he just expands on what he means by psychological states. And looking at what he does to expand our understanding and help us make sure that we understand what he means, he unpacks the word psychological state itself. And in fact, we could create a concept triangle for that, but we're not going to. Now, I want to tie all of this back to page 6, I believe. There it is, right, where he kind of gave us an initial definition from common usage. Remember, he said that after he gives the examples, remember he said, "We have now collected a number of cases of actions which in the ordinary usage of English language would be called cases in which people have acted of their free will. We should also say that in these cases they chose to act as they did. We should also say that they could have acted otherwise." So in virtue of this being true, what he is saying is that when these are the kinds of causes right here, when this is what is causing our, action or some event or choice or decision, what's happening then, the result is that we can say we chose or we choose to do. We chose to do as we have, or we chose to do as we did, we choose to do as we are. But then he has that other component, right, which is we could have done, I could probably say the agent, okay, and then here I can write the agent. Sorry, I'm running out of room there. There we go. Okay, so the agent could have, what was the word that he used up here? It was acted otherwise, chosen otherwise. We can use that. So all of this is really important for understanding how he thinks about the concept of free will, what he thinks is the correct definition. All of these words in here are all important. This right here is the most important element because it captures what he thinks is at the core of free will. But it's good to include this information here because it allows us to fully understand what all could be pinpointed as a psychological state, leaves less room for confusion. And then what I'm saying is that in his mind, that so long as this is true, then the agent can then go ahead and say the agent chose to do as they did, or they're choosing to do as they are, or you could say, yeah, so that is what we would say. And then here, that the agent could or can do otherwise. All right, so of course, for him, there's going to be many examples of actions, decisions, choices that reflect this definition of free will. So when you're doing your table construction and writing your paragraphs, you're looking for things in the write-up of your causal history that reflect this definition and shows attention to, that you can use, not shows attention to, but you're looking for examples in your causal history for events, choices, decisions, actions that Stace might argue or that you might be able to elaborate on as caused by some kind of internal, psychological state or impulse, wish, desire, thoughts, or whatever. But remember, it has to be coming from within the person who is doing the choosing, the deciding, the acting, and whatnot. Okay, so let's bring this to a close by looking at unfree acts. So remember, he says right here, unfree acts are caused by physical forces or physical conditions outside the agent. Going back to page 6 so we can get a little bit more on that. If this is the case, and I'm realizing I should have formatted this a little bit differently, leaving more room to write a note out here to the side. If this is the case, then he would say, going back to page 6, he said we should also say in these cases, so we've got that part. So what does he do? Oh, there we go. We have also collected a number of cases of the opposite kind. They are the cases in which men were not able to exercise their free will. In other words, they had no choice. In other words, whenever this is true, according to Stace, according to his conception or his thought experiment in thinking about common usage for unfree acts, whenever this is the case, then it's also the case that the agent has no choice. So no choice with respect to a decision, no choice with respect to an action, an event, no choice in the matter, and some aspect of one with respect to some aspect of one's reality. And an equally important detail to include is that the person is, oh, you know what? I think I have, yes, I have missed something from the other part. We'll add it back. Compelled to do as they do or did. So you can think about these things in terms of the present tense or the past tense, of course. And of course, whenever we say choice, the agent has no choice. In terms of a decision that was made or an action that took place or an event that unfolded, they were compelled. This means that they were compelled to do as they did. Now, this isn't enough. So I do want to make sure that this isn't enough in terms of, you're thinking about whether or not something would be classified by Stace as free or unfree. You really still have to pay attention to this part right here. Something that I do want to add to up here is something that he says right here. He says, we should also say they could have acted otherwise. For instance, was not compelled. Okay, so there is, well, you could put here there's a lack of external obstacles. Well, no, I don't want to put that there because I think that will confuse you guys. I think we'll stop right there. Okay. One point of clarification, when it comes to physical forces and physical conditions, Um, Make sure that you're not including in that your own brain chemistry, because for him, he's not thinking at that level. You might think otherwise, but remember, we're trying to think like Stace.